When I was younger, I didn't know it, but I was struggling with undiagnosed ADHD and learning differences. Would basically just sit at the back of the class, like feeling demoralized, and just nothing was working, really. Nothing was sinking in. I couldn't understand why I wasn't getting it when everyone else around me was. So I kind of felt like an alien in a way, like, what am I doing here? One of the most transformational things that's ever happened in my life is in between the second and third grade when I was meeting with tutors, and one day a tutor, read a passage, asked me some questions, I gave answers, and she then paused and looked me in the eye and said, "How did you think about that?" And that question changed my life because I had never thought about thinking before. I was very impulsive. Whatever was on my mind, I said. Whatever I felt like doing, I did, and that wasn't very productive. What I've also realized is
one of the most beautiful things about having a show like this and having conversations with people that have done so many amazing things is the amount of data and learning that we get in the process of having the conversation. What led you to a career in this space? I mean, it's definitely a niche, and it's one that you have explored quite extensively. What pulled you into this space in your life?
Wow, well, there's so many twists and turns kind of along the way, and I think nothing ever came easy for me. But one thing was certain was sort of my boundless curiosity for all kinds of things. I moved out to the country in the third grade. There was a sheep farm beside us, a buffalo farm across the road, farmer's field in our backyard that we used to rent out to a farmer. There was a creek, and we had pack of wolves show up on the front lawn every once in a while, and snapping turtles and stuff. So I was very interested. I think I developed a relationship with nature early on. And I also really enjoyed science. My dad used to sit with me for hours, kind of going over, trying to help me with various science problems and things. And he was very curious about the world. And so I think and again, I was kind of struggling. Nothing came easy. It always took me which seemed much longer than anyone else in the class to get the concepts and stuff. But I just sort of was gravitating that area. And, kind of long and short of it is that I was really excited about medicine. I applied to medical school, got rejected from all three schools that I applied to. By that point, I was already doing a little bit of research at McGill University in my undergrad in a biotechnology lab, and I really was excited about it. And I just, I think I liked problem solving because I really liked physics, although I found it really hard in high school. But I liked that idea of getting things wrong and trying different angles and thinking about it and eventually getting it right. I just found that was exhilarating. And so kind of putting all those things together, I went into engineering at McGill, which I think is a degree in problem solving, and sort of just, again, kind of all these things together. Just the field of biomedical engineering was really just taking form as I was graduating, and one of the key things I think that happened was so when I registered at McGill University, I initially registered in the biology program. And then I transferred into engineering in my second year, which kind of required a little bit of finagling. And then in my fourth year, after I got rejected from medical school, I realized that I was kind of being pulled towards this field of biomedical engineering that I didn't know much about. And I wanted to take some courses, but the course instructor said I wasn't able to take them unless I had 3 physiology prerequisites. And I tried to negotiate. He said no. So I actually extended my undergrad by a year. So I could take 3 physiology prerequisites and get into these upper level courses in biomedical engineering, and sort of combining all these things together. That's what really sealed the deal in getting into this field. So definitely, kind of a lot of twists and turns, and it wasn't a linear path whatsoever.
Yeah, and a little bit of tenacity too. I mean, you had to continue to fight your way through. And I understand that learning, even learning in general, was something that you were struggling with early on, and your mom went to the school board and essentially told them that you that there was some opportunity for you to have some extra time, and walk us through what that was like. And it's interesting because when you start to get to learning at the highest levels, so often when we have interviews on this show, we have people that struggled a little bit when they were young, but their thirst for curiosity and knowledge just gets stronger and stronger and stronger once they learn that this is something that is accessible to them, because it felt so far away. Is that how you felt when you were younger?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of things come to mind when you say it and kind of frame it like that, because I think, the other sort of side of it is that, as you kind of go on in your career, you start to engage people who are younger, and you start to try to advise and guide them. And it's so easy to forget the path that one took, and the twists and turns and the challenges, and easy to just say, okay, go do this, don't do that, these kind of things. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's what you really just conveyed there, which is, kind of leading with your curiosity, finding ways to learn and adapt and evolve and figure out what really resonates with you and doesn't. And to me, it's just amazing how providing that advice to the younger generation is really instrumental in shaping their careers as well, So to me, I don't know, there's always these two worlds I'm kind of bouncing between, which is, trying to guide people who are younger, people who might be looking at someone who's a little bit further down the path and seeing something look linear, but it's like, kind of a lot of it is just finding ways to keep moving forward and keeping your antenna kind of sensitized, so you get a sense for how different environments feel and what really resonates and what doesn't. When I was younger, that ended up being a really critical part of my life, because I was struggling, I didn't know it, but I was struggling with undiagnosed ADHD and learning differences. And it presented in the second grade. The teacher wanted to hold me back to repeat the grade, and my parents negotiated for me to spend the summer with tutors to catch up. And I would basically just sit at the back of the class, like feeling demoralized, and just nothing was working, really. Nothing was sinking in. I couldn't understand why I wasn't getting it when everyone else around me was. So I kind of felt like an alien in a way, like, what am I doing here? But one of the most transformational things that's ever happened in my life is in between the second and third grade, when I was meeting with tutors. And one day a tutor, read a passage, asked me some questions, I gave answers, and she then paused and looked me in the eye and said, "How did you think about that?" And that question changed my life, because I had never thought about thinking before. I never thought that I could, I was very impulsive. Whatever was on my mind, I said. Whatever I felt like doing, I did, and that wasn't very productive. And I needed guardrails and guideposts, and I need to kind of self-evolve that. And so I had this newfound awareness, and I started to bring it to everything, and I started to observe other people. I started to sort of watch pattern recognition. How do people behave in different environments, and why do they say that there and not there? Just sort of really opening my mind to what was going on around me. And what happened was that I kept struggling, because I didn't have any, I needed some accommodations to help me through, but I wasn't getting them. And so I was getting C's and D's until the seventh grade, when my mom, so the school system didn't, no one talked about ADHD back then, kind of early mid 80s kind of thing. And my mom went up against the education system and had a massive file, that she had put together on everything teachers had ever said about me. And, I was called lazy. I was called not going to amount to much. They said, "What do you want to be?" I said, "A doctor." They said, "You better set your sights lower. You don't really have the potential for that." And they said, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" My sister was like a straight A student. Once I was helping someone in the class, and the teacher came over and said, "Well, isn't that like the blind leading the blind?" So I definitely had my fair share of a critical feedback from the teachers. But my mom went up against the education system alone and got me identified as having learning differences. And my grades, I got some accommodations, a little bit extra space and time. And my grades went from C's and D's to straight A's immediately. And I think it was because I had been sort of tapping into this awareness and developing tools. And I really just, it's almost like my mind, when I'm asked a question, I see many possible answers and I don't know which answer the teacher wants. And so I'm trying to figure that out, and it takes me time to figure out what's the highest probability answer that they're looking for and how to frame it to them. And so I need time to do that. And when I got that time, I was able to figure it out and start to do well.
It's interesting how curiosity can be almost paralyzing at times, because the more curious we are, the harder it gets to make quick decisions. And I can make quick decisions, but sometimes my wife will ask me a question, and we were talking this morning and I followed up with the question and then another question. And then, I was like, well, if we're going to do this, then I need time to think about this. And because there's a lot of other variables that go with this. And so this is a normal thing. And there's other times where it's black and white and it's just yes or no, or this is a simple question. But if I have to make a decision, I like to think about that decision because I want to see how it's going to be likely to turn out. And
Right.
it's a great skill when you're leading a company or leading research, or, I pay attention to trends. That's definitely something that curiosity does. But in a school environment, it can be very paralyzing. It can almost be something that you start to push down because it's not encouraged in any way when you're asking questions. And I'd love to see schools embrace more curiosity, because I don't think enough people today are actually doing that, or are being curious.
Yeah. I think for, tens of thousands of years, our learning was purely experiential, right? I mean, it was, as hunters and gatherers and in primitive times, for many, many years, we were just learning by being submersed in what we needed to know. A lot of this survival skills that we had to develop, and ways of coexisting with other people, and just learning from people around us, but learning by doing. And the education system, this sort of structure comes in and gets imposed that I think kind of pressurizes the system, and definitely has a lot of advantages, and there's a lot of good things about it, but it also takes away some of the core essence of how we're wired to learn, which is experiential. And so sitting in a classroom with one person sort of sharing information and saying this is how it is and this is what you should be learning, it's kind of like an artificial system that is not connecting to the way that our brains, bodies have been wired to learn over those, millennia. And so I think that, and then the whole testing system as well, I think just creates a lot of challenges as well. Like, I was just watching this documentary the other day about reading and, reading in schools and things. And it was kind of like, they were saying that at one point the governments kind of came in and said, okay, we have to test reading ability. And you think, okay, that's a good thing. But what that typically you don't evaluate is the joy that a child has in reading. And so, and perhaps, they were kind of making the statement that perhaps that's the most important thing, is that it's not really what the child gets out of it. It's the joy of reading and the ability to sort of imagine, like create images in your mind of what you're reading, and kind of being on the adventure of whatever story you're kind of getting into. Like, that's very powerful, and that's how we learned for thousands of years by people telling stories and just visualizing it in our minds, and right. And so yeah. But here we are now having to sort of be more systematic in the answers and the ways that we're evaluating people's sort of reading abilities. And yeah, I mean, I just think it's sort of fascinating that I'm always thinking about like processes of how things are done and how that sort of impacts, it's like people who are neurodiverse, they often fall through the cracks of those kind of models. And that's one of the big problems, I think, of the education system, is that it caters to the people, it's kind of like one standard deviation or whatever it is, but that people who are beyond that just are not served very well, and they're the ones who really needs the support. And often those people, when they get the support, they can contribute to society in very unique ways.
Yeah, I can relate quite well in that I always felt like a couple of important things. I've always felt like school was a prison. So when I went into a school, even to this day, my wife's been a school teacher for many, many years. And even going to the kids' schools, like I just feel like the walls are closing and there's not enough space to learn. There's not enough space to move. And reading, just in general, to that point, I remember the first time I was able to read something that I enjoyed. And it started with sports books, and then it started with I read the Choose Your Own Adventures and little
Me
things
too.
like that.
Yeah, I love those.
But I didn't like what I was forced to read very often. If I was forced to read it, it's all my brain just shut down on it, and it was
Yeah.
something I had to do, not something I got to do. And as I grew up, it became something that obviously now I read incessantly and have for many, many years. But as I grew up and learned how to cope, even when I would study for things, if it was a memorization thing or a major exam of some sort, I found myself having to read it 3 times. I would read it the first time to get all the outside thoughts out. And then I would read the next time and I would be able to comprehend. And by the third time, I would actually start to be able to answer questions about it. And but that takes a little bit of time. And
Yeah.
these are learned processes that I learned to better cope with the way my brain works. And really, I was wired to be an entrepreneur. So I was somebody who was looking for opportunities to build, to create, to develop. So it is very interesting. And I get very excited about talking about the ways to make that different and to really not lose those students along the way, to not lose those kids who could end up doing great things, but often end up in bad spots because we told them they weren't smart, or we defined them in a way that didn't move them in that direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we all sort of process things in unique ways, experience the world in unique ways, and I mean, I would say that generally, what I have seen though is that having a teacher who truly is passionate about their subject matter can really make a massive difference. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the education system, is that most kids do encounter at least one teacher that is passionate about a particular subject. And it's amazing how that can be so polarizing in a child's life, to like they more likely to pursue that in greater lengths and greater detail, just from a single having a single teacher, single class experience, where someone, and I think to me that just says a lot. We need to look more deeply into that and sort of try to figure out how do we populate and the whole system with that type of inspiration.
Yeah, it's interesting because you said one teacher asked you a question and it changed the whole way you were thinking for the rest of your life, and it really changed your life. And a lot of times when you're in a role like that, the question that teacher asked was probably so normalized that she wouldn't even know that it made the impact that it made, because it was just a natural tendency for that person, and it was the right time at the right place with the right question. I think when you coach and you teach, a lot of times people will come up to you and say, you said something to me one time and it really changed my life, and I'll never forget what that meant. And you don't even remember saying it because it's something you probably say all the time or do all the time. So finding those moments and elevating them could be very valuable.
Yeah, I know, totally agree. Yeah.
Tell me about Life Ignition Tools. Tell me about Lit. You felt called to write this book. You have a set of transformative insights that can help people. Talk to me about where it came from and just a little bit to our listeners about the book, so we can get into some of the questions and some of the things that can transform their lives today.
Absolutely. So what happened was, about 7 or 8 years ago, I was contacted by an agent in New York Heather Jackson, and she had read some articles on my laboratory's work where we turn to nature for inspiration, using we call it bioinspiration, or biomimicry, to solve medical problems. And she said, hey, how would you like to write a book on that? And I was immediately interested in doing that, but I took a few days to think about it, and I realized that there was actually something even more burning within me that I wanted to write about, which is the struggles that I went through when I was younger and all these tools that I developed initially to survive, but eventually to thrive. And, I've been sort of journaling for decades, and not journaling not sort of the classical journaling where I'll sit down for an hour, half an hour and write. I just sort of the thoughts in my mind about processes and how things work and reflections. I kind of single sentences throughout the day. I used to carry around these little books that I would write in, and now I do it on my phone because then it's searchable. In fact, the other day I took my entire journal over the last several months and I put it into ChatGPT, and I was like, "What's the summary?" It was really interesting to see what it kind of summarized. It was
I love it.
Neat.
I do that stuff all the time.
Yeah, yeah. So I said I want to write about that, and she said, yeah, that sounds great. And so that's kind of how Lit began. And it's the tools in Lit didn't come out of my laboratory; they actually came out of my laboratory for life. And it's it's ever evolving, and really the essence of Lit is intentionality. It's how do we make decisions that are aligned with our kind of core wisdom and and our values, and how there's so many we tend to just do what we experience whenever we're in a certain environment. I just found myself replicating that, but then I started to realize that that didn't necessarily work for me. And that there were that I needed to try on different patterns and algorithms, and I needed to test things out. Like, for example, in the research world, there's certain ways that people present science. And there's certain ways that people, in presentations, right? PowerPoint presentations, for example, certain ways people write research papers, certain ways they apply for grants, certain ways, kind of everything is done, mentoring as well. And I started to sort of realize that I was just replicating what I had learned, but yet that was one of unlimited possibilities. And so, to me, that's part of the essence of Lit as well, is sort of recognizing that what we're living today in everything we do is one of multiple, a multiplicity of possibilities, and that we can actually change that up and find processes and tools that can elevate our fulfillment, that can improve our mental health, that can make the work we do more efficient, that can help us align with maximizing impact. And so, one example is I realized as I was advancing through life that questions are one of the best technologies that we have available as humans, and that questioning is actually a skill that we can develop and get better at day by day by day, and it never ends. We can continuously improve our ability to ask high value questions. And I started looking around in the other researchers in the community, and I realized that the researchers who do the most impactful research are the ones who are asking the best questions. And my postdoc mentor, Bob Langer, who's a co-founder of Moderna and probably 100 other companies, he once said something to the effect of, in the education system, going back to that, we're judged on the answers we give, but in life, we're judged by the questions that we ask. And so I started to realize, that really resonated with me. I realized right after, this experience between second and third grade, that whenever I asked a question, I was able to hyper-focus for a few moments afterward on the answer. So I started to realize that questioning is how I learn. So if I ask more questions, more information imprints in my mind, I can recall it later, I can connect it to other things I know, wow, questions really work for me. And so, but then what happened was I got to grad school, and academics tend to go to these invited seminar speakers, once a month or every couple weeks, whatever it is. And I went there, and I'm kind of dozing in and out during the lecture, and then at the end is the question and answer period. And people start asking these incredible questions, which are just go right to the heart of what the speaker just spoke about. And I'm sitting there thinking, why are these questions not coming to my mind? Like I kind of feeling insecure about it, almost like shaming myself about it. And what I've realized throughout my life is that whenever I can't do something or I'm not great at doing something, it's not an absolute. It just means I haven't engaged the right process that works for me to develop that skill. And so I started to think, okay, well, what can I do to improve my questioning? And when I was younger, I used to play chess with my dad. And, chess is all about pattern recognition. So, the expert players compared to the novice players, the expert players can recognize patterns and see 10, 11, 12 moves ahead. And so I started to think, okay, what about pattern recognition could I bring to questioning? And so the next seminar I went to, everyone was focused on what the speaker was saying, but I was focused on something completely different. I was focused on the questions people were asking at the end of the seminars. And I wrote them all down. I literally went to seminars, and I would just wait till the end, and I would write all the questions down. And then after a couple months, I looked at the list, and I'm going through, and a couple days pass, and I'm just thinking about it, and boom, all of a sudden, light bulb moment. I realized that the questions could be put under 4 or 5 different categories. One is, is what they're doing really important? So if they're developing a diagnostic for blood, and they did all of their experiments in saltwater saline, they may have gotten incredible, spectacular results, but they haven't tested it in this complex system of blood where things are more likely to go wrong. So it might not work in blood. So the results are not yet important. Some questions were around, was the experiment actually working? Some experiments are really complicated to set up, and sometimes they don't work as you would anticipate. You get wonky results. So there's questions around that. And then there's questions of whether the data that they had presented, the results, support the conclusions that they're making. Like they may overstep their conclusions. That happens a lot. And so when I started realizing this, there were a few other things. I was like, wow, this is incredible, because I recognized the reason behind the questions. So it wasn't just questions. There was actually like a rationale for why they were asking it. I now understood the rationale. Next seminar I went into, I'm listening intently to what they're saying. I'm taking notes. I'm thinking of the questions that everyone else is thinking about. And I'm also, because I'm like thinking about the questions, it's also stimulating my creativity. I'm starting to connect it with other information I have in my mind. I'm starting to come up with ideas of what they could do next. And so this was like, to me, a massive, transformational experience in really understanding how questioning is a skill and how I could develop it by sort of trying to understand why people were asking, what were the questions other people were asking and why. And I've also been able to bring that to social settings. So for example, in a social setting, you typically might see someone who's really good at schmoozing and connecting with other people. And so I start thinking, okay, well, what questions are they asking? And so I start, remembering them. I'm writing them down, and I start to sort of tune into what is it that allows me to connect deeply with other people. And it's like when I lead with curiosity. And then so I start thinking, that's what I realize, is that the people who connect the best in these networking sessions and social settings are the ones who are genuinely interested in what they're questioning, like there's something behind the questions, that there's a rationale. They're not just asking the questions because they've heard other people ask them. It's connected to like a core sort of curiosity. And so I was like, okay, well, what am I curious about? Well, I'm really curious about people's upbringing and like what was their childhood like, and how did they make decisions about like where to go and move and what job, and how did they choose, and what advice were they getting at the time, and how did they figure out which advice to take. And so I start tuning into that, and then that starts to help cultivate social interactions for me and deepen my connections with other people.
It's powerful. It's funny because I have for so long talked about the ability to connect lies in being interested, not interesting. And
Yeah.
so many people think it's the other way around. They think that you walk into a room and the more interesting you are, the more people will talk to you.
Yeah.
And that is great. If you're that attractive that you're drawing everybody to you, that's super great. But for the average person, for 95% of people out there, being
Yeah.
interested and truly giving of your time, your energy, your interest to somebody allows them to come back to you. But the skills, what you're describing is you're finding ways that you can become more successful by the way you learn, not just the way that that other people receive that information. You're helping people really cope with things they probably, I mean, think of how included you felt in the room. You described as you were asking, as people were asking questions, that you were almost shaming yourself that you weren't thinking of these questions and you felt excluded. As you found the pattern, as you found the opportunities of
Yeah.
where these questions would go, the trends, you started to feel more included, like you were just one of the group. Then you were out in front of them. Now you're a leader in a room full of people. It's such a transformative moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think to me, what I've also realized is, let's say if I hear this statement, be interested, not interesting, kind of focus on being interested. And then I think to myself, okay, well, what's the process for doing that? Because, okay, that sounds really good, but if I don't have a process for doing it, I can't execute on that. I can't actually become interested. And so what I realize is that to become interested, I need to experiment with questions. How do I experiment with questions? I listen to the questions other people are asking, and I repeat those questions, but I don't just repeat them when I'm in conversation. I tune into the cues, like what is it that, like, am I feeling like, I can't believe I asked that? Or am I like, wow, this is really great. This is leading to some really interesting things that I'm interested in. And so it's almost like this experimental process of, it's like, I used to think like, why don't the questions just populate in my mind? It just doesn't work that way. But I can be like an acute observer of other people and observe their questions. It's actually a pretty interesting adventure, to do that, like to go out and actually be like, all right, today I'm going to listen, I'm going to tune in and focus my attention on the questions that people ask around me. And I'm going to take some notes, and write them down. And then when I'm in a social setting the next day or whatever it is, that evening, I'm going to try out some of these questions, but I'm going to tune into how do I feel and which questions really connect with what I'm most interested in. And by engaging in that process, I've realized that I've been able to develop the skill of being interested.
How do you execute this in your life with your family and in your own world? How have you taken these skills and turn them into something that you're doing every day, not just for research purposes and for sharing, but for your life?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is creating space in my life to be able to be open to the pain points of the moment, right? And so what I mean by that is that in various let's say settings, let's say I'm meeting with students in the lab, or I'm having a conversation with a family member, or I'm creating, and this is something I'm actively working on. And so it's like, I'm trying to create space. And what I mean by that is like, I'm not, my mind is trying to focus in on, and to listen, right? And to be, I hate to say like be present, be in the moment, but it's kind of like, that's what just because it's like said so often, but like,
sense.
To just kind of listen and be able to react with all of my senses and whatever my mind is sort of taking me based on that. Because so often I feel like we're so busy in our days and we do things back to back to back that we have all these movies that are playing in our minds at any given time, and we're not able to actively listen. And so I have all these practices that I do and rituals, and they're constantly changing, so that I can try to focus my attention, and so that I can actively engage in development of skills that I'm really interested in developing, be very intentional about it. So just for example, like one of the things, I'll give you actually a few things that I do. One is when I walk outside, I cycle through my senses. So as I'm walking, we have 2 dogs, and as I'm walking the dogs, I hone in on individual senses. Like I'll say sight, and I'll look at the texture of the bark on the trees, and I'll look at the tops of the trees and the shapes of the trunks, and I'll look at the clouds. And then I'll say hearing, and I'll listen for the birds and the rustling of the wind in the leaves. And I'll say touch, and I'll slow down and feel the clothes on my skin. I'll feel my heels hit the ground, and I'll feel the wind against my face. And I've been practicing this for a while now, as it's so easy to do it as well, because otherwise I'm just ruminating. My mind's just like, my head's down, and I'm just like playing whatever's going to happen next, or what just happened, or, whatever the kind of like, sort of, I don't know, rumination du jour, whatever it is. So, but if I'm trying to hone in on what ends up happening is now as I walk outside, I see the texture of the bark on the trees, and it catches my gaze, and it holds it. Like it's not like my eyes aren't jumping around as they used to, as much. And so I'm able to focus more. When I'm eating, I try to close my eyes for a few bites, and I try to just feel like what that shift is, because all of a sudden I start to realize that it's like when I breathe in and then I breathe out, it's when I breathe out that I actually can taste it even more. Like if I breathe out of my nose, like I taste it, like it's even more, and I'm like, wow, that's so interesting. And again, it's like focusing in on the sense of taste, right? And smell. And so to me, there's all these rituals. The other thing I've actually just started doing at night before I go to bed is, and this is just totally experimental, right? I have actually never spoken about this before, but what I do now is I pick like a creature in nature, and like, let's say like a butterfly, or it could be a bird, or it could be a snake, or it could be, whatever it is. And I visualize myself standing on the back of that creature and what that experience might be like. Right? Just as I'm falling asleep. And it actually, I feel like it's been helping me to actually fall asleep, because my mind gravitates towards what happened during the day, what's going to happen tomorrow, and all these things that just are not productive or useful for me to be thinking about as I'm trying to fall asleep. Kind of keeps me awake, it keeps my heart rate elevated. And so I try to, so to me, it's like all of these rituals that are so easy for us to practice in our day for me, it's helped hone my attention. It's helped me to create space, to be open to making changes, and to be listening for cues, and to, it's giving me sort of like on-ramps, and opening the door, opening the window to being able to really feel what's happening with my interaction with my environments as I'm kind of, interacting with my family or at work, or, whatever I'm doing.
It does sound cliche when we say, be where your feet are, or be present, but the reality is very seldom are we truly in that space. And I think one of the places I most recognize it is when I go to Italy, for example. I was walking at Lake Como, and it's just a regular walk on the way to a church we were walking to, and my buddy and I are just walking, and we can't not stop and look at the view, and we can't not stop and look at the flowers, and we can't not stop and look at the house and the colors on the house, and like it's just so intense. And then I looked at him and I said, it's funny, we're going on this walk, and all these people are walking past us that just have their head down. They live here and they miss this every day, and then we go home and we miss all the things that are beautiful right around us because we're not so present. And so, it's something that I also try to do on a regular basis, is just to be aware of the surroundings when I'm on a walk, smell, taste, see, just spend time in that individual space. I like those rituals. And I think the bedtime ritual is a really good one too. And anything that takes your brain away, I often think of the waves crashing on the shore, and as they pull out, they're kind of like pulling away all the things that I don't need to think about. And so like I often, when I'm trying to relax, I just think of that motion because it's so interesting and relaxing to me. And so It's a little, it's a routine and a trick that I think everybody has something that they're doing, whether they count sheep or they ride on the backs of snakes. They do something that gets them in that place.
Actually, one thing just to jump in on that, something that you just said. I mean, I feel like there's an evolutionary basis for why we get sort of desensitized to our environments, and it's not, because I feel like there's a tendency to sort of be like, oh, why am I, like, to shame yourself, right? Of like, okay, why am I missing all this stuff in my environment? And by the way, I mean, I feel like through the rituals and practices that I'm doing, I'm seeing things that have always been there, but I just haven't seen them. Like birds, now I see the birds playing with each other. I see the creatures looking at each other, like the squirrels and the rabbits and the birds. I see like an interaction, a dance, kind of happening that has always been there, but I just haven't sort of focused on it. But I think it's important to realize there's an evolutionary basis for why we become desensitized to our environments, and I think the reason is it's survival, that it's conservation of energy. Like in order to survive, our brains gravitated to the low energy brain state and to the low energy body state. So I think there truly is this evolutionary basis of this low energy state that we gravitate towards, both for our brains and our bodies, because we were, for tens of thousands of years, we were outside working hard to survive. And any time, where there might have been a break or whatever, our brains would just gravitate to a low energy state so we could conserve it for when we needed it next. Whether there was something that we needed to run away from, something we needed to run towards, to hunt for food, or if we needed to move from one location to another because we depleted resources, for example. And so I think that in our environments, we kind of become desensitized to what's around us as a way for our brains to move to this energy saver mode. And I think the challenge is that doesn't always serve us. It can serve us in certain settings if we're learning a skill and we want to sort of build on it. We don't have to relearn something all the time. It can be useful, kind of lock in a pattern and then not have to be in this high energy brain state to remember it or repeat it. But it also can be a disservice to us, because if our brains gravitate to this low energy state where they anticipate, what comes next, and it's this energy saver mode, we become susceptible to misinformation. We become desensitized to our environments, and our senses become desensitized. And so we end up, our senses is how we experience the world. And if we're desensitized, then all of a sudden our experiences are not as rich or deep as they could be. And so to me, that's what a big part of LIT is. It's about resensitizing our aliveness. It's resensitizing our senses so we can more deeply experience the world and be open to those cues that we're constantly getting from our minds. Our bodies are very intelligent, sending us cues in our interactions with other people.
It's a great point, and I understand. I think the older I get, the more I'm attuned to the things that I'm missing, and I start to slow down just a little bit. And in the early part of my adulthood, I was speeding through everything, and that it was very good that I was numb to some of those things, because it allowed me to progress and proceed at times that I would have been distracted. Whereas today, I need the distraction, I need the time, I need the separation and the space and the peace, and it really is, it's powerful. When you talk about LIT and you're talking to people that have read the book, that have gone through some of these transformative insights, what do you find is one or two of the most powerful things that resonate with people? Is there something that's standing out to you that everybody comes up to you and they're like, oh my gosh, that one thing is so powerful and I've implemented it, and every time it's changing my life?
Yeah, definitely a bunch of things. I mean, one of the things that actually I think has resonated a lot is one of the tools is press pause, and it's one of these things that's so simple, but yet we don't tend to use in our daily lives. And I'll give you an example of how it works and how powerful it can really be. So, I used to do these back-to-back meetings constantly, and I get to the end of the day and I'd feel like, wow, I just did 2 marathons worth of work, and not everything worked out, but I feel good because I've really accomplished a lot today, and I'll just repeat it tomorrow. And what I realized, though, is as I've kind of experimented with different ways of being and different processes and things, that I was actually missing out on higher value opportunities. I was missing out on more impactful sort of trajectories of my work. And what I started doing was I started building in time in between my meetings. And the time wasn't to do email. It was just to, close my eyes or go for a walk, or really, just to sort of let my mind sync up. And I think we need time to process information and experiences. And one of the things that I've been doing is, there's a tendency, I think, when I go for a walk outside, when I'm walking the dogs, I used to be on my phone constantly, And when I go to the bathroom, I was on my phone constantly. And to me, these are the situations, the times when the cues, when things start to really materialize in my mind, where I start to sort of put the pieces together. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone on a walk without looking at devices, where when I come back, I figured things out. Like things have progressed in my mind, and I'm sort of connected dots I wouldn't normally connect. Or when you're meeting with somebody, often they'll say things that connect to other things that other people have told you, or other information in your mind, but you can't draw those connections unless you give it space and let it swirl. And so to me, pressing pause is just such an important tool that we can easily incorporate into our lives to build in the time to process information and experiences to sync up, and to allow the dots to all sort of align and connect. And it's led to, someone will say something in a meeting, and then I'll pause and I'll be like, wait a moment, someone said something 2 months ago, in some sort of meeting, and wait, we should all get together because that's the person we need to bring in to get it going. And I wouldn't have thought of that had I not pressed pause. And so that's one major tool that resonates with a lot of people. Another tool is around focusing attention, and I think that's been one of the greatest challenges in today's society. Is we just have stimuli and information coming at us from all angles. There's over $900 billion with a B spent on marketing and advertising every year to hijack our attention. And this is a massive force that we're up against, coupled with this kind of survival wiring that we have towards a low energy brain, state. We become susceptible. We become robots. We're a lot of things we do, our purchases and how we're purchasing and what we're purchasing, and productization and our rituals and what we do in the day, our practices. It's basically being fed to us, and we're just replicating it, and we're reinforcing it in our culture. And so we need ways to intercept those patterns, and one of the ways to do it is to regain control of our attention. And so what happened to me, actually, I had a transformational experience when I was younger, when I was walking home one day, along this 1,000-foot driveway. I mentioned we moved out to the country when I was in the 3rd grade, and literally the driveway was 1,000 feet long, carved through a forest. There were no devices. And as I'm walking along the driveway, I realized that there's something that I've never seen before, and it's kind of weird, hanging from a tree, and I get closer and closer and closer and closer, and eventually I'm right up in front of it, and I'm like, oh my God, that's a bat. I was literally right in front of it, and I'd never seen a bat before. And all of a sudden all the thoughts, all the things I was ruminating about from, kind of coming off the bus from school and trying to assimilate and fit in and things not working well, all I could think about was the bat. All the other thoughts got squeezed out of my mind. And so I thought, wow, this is almost like my brain is being pinched. And I'm laser focused on the bat. And I thought, okay, how can I bring this to other areas of my life? Maybe I can, instead of just asking questions as a way of learning, I can hone my attention. And so we all have this incredible evolutionary inheritance of neuroplasticity, the ability to rewire our brains. Our brains are constantly being rewired, and one of the challenges is that our brains are being rewired often based on other people's sort of wants and needs, and based on big companies and corporations, and how we're being, it's like how you go onto YouTube and you go to look for a particular video, and all of a sudden you end up there like an hour jumping around, and right, whatever you're watching is it's actually rewiring your brains. And so it's not in an intentional way. You don't necessarily want to watch all these videos. You didn't go there to watch those things, but what you're watching is actually reshaping your mind. So we have this ability to reshape our minds in an intentional way. And the more we keep at something, the more we can create these patterns, this wiring in our minds that make it like easier to do it. So when we start to develop practices and rituals to focus our attention, to pinch our brains, it becomes easier and easier. So some of the things that I mentioned before, like going outside and focusing on individual senses, that's actually an exercise in focusing our attention. Focus your attention on sight, focus your attention on hearing, focus your attention on touch. And as you do that, over several days, a week or two, you're cultivating focusing your attention, and then you can actually bring that to other areas of your life. So now I find when I read, I can read for much longer than I ever could before. I can be more intentional with this incredible superpower that we all have, our ability to focus our attention. And I can listen more carefully when I'm in conversation with people. I can, I'm not interrupting people as much as I used to with all these thoughts in my mind. I'm sort of able to let those dissipate and to really hear what people are saying to me. So pinching my brain has been a critical tool that, I think has resonated with a lot of people as well.
It's interesting because as you were describing the bat, it's as I got older, one of the things that as I learned meditation, I learned, to truly pause. It was one of those things where I also learned that I had been listening to music so often in my life that when I listened to music, I was often separating completely from whatever was on my brain. And it was always a way for me to separate and to break the routine. And you don't realize how much of a coping mechanism something can be in a positive way until you look back on it and you see how you've executed upon it so many years. And so my kids give me a hard time because sometimes when I get a really good album, like I listen to it over and over and over again because I get so deep into it that it's part of just separating completely and highly focusing on something outside of the devices and outside of the distractions. And it makes such good sense. I love those two, both really, really valuable ideas to help people really cope with what's going on today. So much data, so much information coming in that it's easy to get shaped by something outside of yourself.
Yeah. And I think, one thing that I kind of hear in what you're saying to me is just really jumping out is your experience with music is that it's, to me, just the way I'm sort of interpreting it, it's not just about listening to the music and sort of, listening to the albums, but it's also having the awareness of how that changes the thoughts in your mind, right? And noticing the shift that is occurring in your ability to be present in the moment. And to me, that's sort of like, that's one thing about lit is that it's not prescriptive. It's not going to say like, go listen to music because that's going to solve all your problems. But it's more like we got to experiment with all of these things. Like maybe it's like, go listen to some music that you really like or things that in your childhood, just to bring back memories or whatever. But notice the shifts that are occurring in your thoughts and, before and after and sort of like, okay, and then try something else and notice the shifts and try to focus your attention on how what's sort of populating your mind might be changing a little bit depending on your experiences. And through that, you can find the experiences in that moment that work for you to, kind of get into a meditative state and be able to experience, a certain level of calmness and often people, when they go out into nature, they experience that exactly. And, that's been a big part of my life. And, the science is there as well to basically show when you go into nature, there's strong evidence showing you switch from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic nervous system. So instead of kind of being in this fight or flight sort of mode, which we are often in for far too long, all of us every day, because of this digital world information stimuli coming at us, when we go into nature, it just has this calming effect, and it's allows us to become more grounded and have a better sense of well-being, and we can get that through other things, as you were saying, like music, and but it's important, I think, for people to experiment and then tune in to what's really happening in their bodies and their minds.
Yeah, I find myself getting relieved when I'm in a place where my phone doesn't work. So the older I get, and the more the phone it becomes, and remember, it's also a great thing. I mean, I can work from anywhere. I can travel with my children. I could do things I never could have done a decade or more ago, and I'm very grateful for that freedom. But with that freedom comes restraints, and some of the restraints are you're tied to it all the time. So you get to a place in nature where it doesn't work, or you leave it behind, and it's liberating. And I think it's very, it takes a lot to do that. Not a lot of people think about it, but they don't do it very often. And when they do, the thought processes could really, really open up for them. I agree completely.
Well, I think I like to think of everything kind of as energy transfer, kind of perhaps it all starts from the sun and, powering photosynthesis and, that leading to all of life and then the energy going between, creatures like in different ways. And to me, it's sort of like when you bring your phone with you, the phone is this powerful energy source, representing connection to all kind, almost to the whole world, to the whole planet, right? And especially, the people that you're close with. And it's sort of like you're bringing this energy source with you, and of course you're going to be tempted to interact with it and to, even if you have it in your pocket, it's going to be hard not to take it out and take a look, because as soon as your mind thinks about something, you'd be like, oh, I need to check that, I need to check this, I need to, and it's providing this direct transfer of energy to you. But what that prevents is your ability then to get that energy from the environment around you. And so to me, that's why it's important to have a strategy, to be intentional. And what's never worked for me is when I set the intention to not use my phone, because to me it's an empty intention. Like, it's like I wasn't born to not use my phone. Like, it's hard to sort of rationalize that. But if I say, my intention is to embrace my environment, to be curious, to cultivate my curiosity of what's around me, to develop an awareness of how my environment is shaping me, and to be able to hone my thoughts and my actions so that I'm working within my environment in very meaningful ways, then looking at my phone is going to prevent me from experiencing my environment, right? Like, if I'm going around my neighborhood trying to connect with the trees and the creatures and, trying to cycle through my senses, I can't do that if I'm on my phone. Like, it's just going to take that, experience away. And so to me, that's how, if I go into, let's say if I go to the bathroom, for example, right? And I say, okay, my intention is I want to be open to the cues that I'm going to get, because a lot of thoughts come to my mind when I'm, when you're there, right? A lot of things just kind of come to you. But if I'm on my phone, then I'm going to miss the cues that could be coming to me. And so it's sort of like the intention is to not use my phone. The intention is to be open to the cues, and I can't be open to the cues if I'm on my phone. So that's kind of how I've been able to rationalize it.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think a lot of the research that you've done, a lot of the personal routines, the things that you share are helpful to everybody and can really be transformative and helping people as they read and learn about Life Ignition tools. Tell everybody where they can find LIT, where they can find you, and learn more from you, please.
Sure. So my website, put pretty much everything there, as well as content that's not available in the book. It's just my name, Jeff Karp, Karp, .com. And you can find out also some information about my laboratory at Harvard Medical School and the Brigham and Women's Hospital, and some of the bio-inspired technologies that we've been developing and moving to clinical trials and patients, and bringing new technologies to the market. Everything from surgical glues that can seal holes inside a beating heart that's been inspired by slugs and snails, to nanoparticles that we've developed to cross the blood-brain barrier to treat neurological conditions, to needles that automatically stop in the body to deliver payloads, for example, to the back of the eye to treat macular degeneration, to technologies we're developing for osteoarthritis and various forms of cancer.
That's awesome. Well, keep doing big things, because we certainly need both of the routines and the fun stuff that help us think bigger and better, and most importantly, some of the breakthroughs that you're working on to help heal our bodies, our minds, and our daily functioning. So, Dr. Jeff Karp, it's been an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being a part of it today and sharing with us your message. And for those of you listening, go ahead and pick up Lit and learn from his experiences and all the things that he's learned and taught to all of us today and beyond. Thank you so much for being a part of the show.
Thank you for a wonderful conversation.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you liked it, there's more where this one came from. Click here and enjoy some more.